Hey guys, welcome back to another PS2 Memories video. Here we are actually taking a look at Resident Evil Outbreak File 2. It's actually a direct expansion onto the first Outbreak game that was released back in 2003. This game was actually released later on in 2004 in Japan and then later in 2005 in North America and Europe. So it follows on pretty much the same gameplay style and aesthetic of the original game, but it actually had improved elements towards the game. There was a lot of elements that were removed from the original game due to certain issues or glitches that came up with the original game when certain encounters and certain features just wouldn't work at certain times, especially if you were playing on your own. When you tried to interact with other players, they kind of didn't really respond a lot of the time to your demands. It did affect the gameplay to somewhat, and it kind of left a negative kind of feel to that. It's not to say that the game was actually bad. The game played really well, but there were certain elements that kind of took away from the gameplay where it could have been a lot more fluent and easier to use for the player in mind. But with the second game in the series, they actually managed to fix a lot of these issues, and they removed a lot of those negative features that were causing issues in the first game. One of the noticeable differences is due to even the likes of the online services. Even though in Europe we didn't get the game to play online, we only had access to the single player feature. But the likes of in Japan and in America, the online features were drastically improved and overhauled, featuring like new lobbies, and obviously allowed you to pick up better kind of signals in terms of server so that you could get in contact with more players that were also looking to play the game at the time, which was kind of an issue with the first game. Another cool thing that actually was added, you could also play as the same characters from the first game, each with their own unique abilities and elements that could also help to walk through your progress, and players could have certain abilities that could allow you access to other areas that other characters couldn't access. But one of the cool elements that was added into this version of the game is that in each scenario or each level you had a checklist to complete that consisted of special actions, and you needed to complete them to reach 100% within that level, and upon doing so you would unlock infinity mode, so it would allow for the players for their weapons to never break and you would never run out of ammunition, which again would increase the overall playability of the game and give you something to kind of strive and aim for. Plus it would make your playthroughs a lot easier, because we all know a lot of the things with this game, because they are difficult games, the Outbreak games, and having weapons breaking you and even run out of ammo at times when you actually need it the most can definitely make or break your playthrough. So it's definitely something that was actually much needed within the second game itself. So the plot actually does continue on from the first game, where you do reprise the roles of each of the characters, but this time you get to go through different environments, and you also get to revisit a lot of older environments from the game. Primarily you get to revisit the RPD police station from Resident Evil 2 and 3, and you could gain access to a load of different areas in that scenario. But in saying that, when you compare it to the likes of Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3, when you actually go through some of the areas, a lot of the areas are blocked off because there's certain things happening. They've either been barricaded off, or there's explosions and there's barrels and there's stuff on fire in areas that you can't access, but in the original games in the series you could access them with no issues. So I guess it was trying to kind of not only limit the gameplay or limit the areas you could go into, but it was also to keep everything within a confined area so that players could just focus on what they needed to do within the missions. The game itself, gradually as you went through the game, would increase in difficulty, and depending on the boss fight and so forth, you'd need to have to make sure that you had the right type of weapons and equipment with you to be able to have any sort of a chance to defeat a lot of the bosses throughout your playthroughs. The game itself now did kind of get mixed reviews, even with all the improvements of the original game, but it still has built up a unique fan base and has kind of like a cult following. A lot of Resident Evil fans, myself included, have actually shown an interest in actually having both of these games actually be re-released under new consoles, but to have improved visuals and obviously have online play, because it's one of those games that in its own way was probably way ahead of its time to some degree, because the online features on the PlayStation 2 at that time would not have been as good as, say, the PlayStation 3, 4 and 5, generally the modern consoles in general. So if the game was to be re-released at this point, it would actually be a welcome addition to the series, because again it would allow players of old to re-experience the game but to give them more avenues to enjoy it. But it would also introduce new players to the games as well that may have not been familiar with these games or may never have played them. And the fact is, if it did have the online aspect, it would definitely allow for a lot of replayability with the games, because the games themselves, even though the levels themselves weren't overly long, but there was an awful lot to do in terms of all the little tasks and agendas you had to complete throughout each playthrough. So it definitely gave you a reason to want to go back and play again. So if you had that coupled with online features and being able to play co-op with other people, it would definitely improve that a lot more. The Outbreak games were also the last games pretty much within the Resident Evil series to use kind of like the third person or fixed camera perspectives in terms of the series, because after that these games were released not too long before Resident Evil 4 was released. And pretty much every game after that, up until the more recent games of recent years, everything followed kind of the same kind of trend of Resident Evil 4 with the over-the-shoulder kind of shooters. So it definitely took a drastic turn in the franchise from that point onwards, and Capcom never really decided to ever really go back to its original style. They kind of just wanted to stick with what was popular back in those days. Plus, a lot of people genuinely don't like games with tank controls, and these type of games don't seem to appeal to a lot of people. For more hardcore survival horror enthusiasts like myself and other gamers that are into these games, these here are definitely a must, and we always will go back to play them. But for a lot of people, they're not really into these type of games. They like the more practical, easier to implement style, like shooter style games, because they are easier to play. Games like this here do take and require a lot more patience. But if you're an old school gamer like myself that grew up with these style of games, and even like one of the first ever games I ever played on the PlayStation or even the PS1 was the very first Resident Evil, so I became familiar with the tank controls. And you grew up in an era when video games were a lot more difficult anyway, so that wasn't really an issue. Gamers of today, I'm not sure that they have that much patience in terms of these type of games. But the thing is, if you allow yourself to look past those niggly things and to just see the game for what it is, you'll be surprised how good of a game this series or the older school series of Resident Evil games actually are, and you will actually enjoy them. But again, it's not for everybody, but for those that do want to play it, I highly recommend that you do. And even if you do want to have a look at what the Resident Evil games were like before they really changed the perspectives, the Outbreak series is definitely something that you can look into. So I'd love to know your thoughts on Resident Evil Outbreak File 2 or even the first game, and what are your thoughts on them? Did you actually play them back in the day, and did you enjoy them? What did you think of them overall in general? I'd love to hear your thoughts down in the comments below. So if you have enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more videos like this based around the likes of survival horror games and even other types of similar games that were released on the PlayStation 2, make sure to leave a like on the video, and again subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to be updated of future videos. Also be sure to check out some of the other videos here on the screen where you will see other videos of other types of games that were released on the PlayStation 2 back in the day, and there may be something here that actually you may have seen before that you actually enjoyed, or something maybe new that you may have not have seen. At least it'd be a good experience to revisit them. And until next time, keep those gaming memories alive.